I mean, I don't want to get political, but I'm just telling you, when I'm president, every school that has a spring game gets a massive tax credit. That's part one of version one of phase one of my platform. Spoiler alert, like 80% of my stances just have to do with college football. We're jam-packed, we're high atop a wintry downtown Nashville, Tennessee, snow-covered again, highs in the lower 20s again, but we push on, as only we would do as a show. The playoff's going to expand. I don't like it, but it's going to expand. So tonight's show is not going to be about whether I like it or not, because I promised you, once we got to this point, I wouldn't relitigate it every night. However, I think I have found some things that I like. Out of all the available paths, I found one that I like. It's not one that you would think I like. And then I'm going to go full diabolical, just total and utter sicko mode, and I'm going to present an idea to you that probably won't happen, but should it happen? We will discuss. We'll do the ACC program rankings tonight. I'm trying to fix scheduling in the sport. No one's working with me. I'm trying to do it. Big 12, a conference that I proudly fly the flag for above this building, has come under a little bit of an attack, a little bit of slander being thrown the Big 12's way, and they have come to me and asked me to defend their good honor. So I'll try. I'll try. Good Alan Jackson song, very underrated. I'll try. We'll see how good I can do. This also, if you're listening on podcast, Colin, I didn't tell you I was going to do it. This is an empty bottle. Doesn't even have a label on it. But what was in this bottle was 300 milligrams of pre-workout. It's caffeine for the layperson. And I chugged it right before the show. So the vibes should increase substantially over the next few minutes. And I take little to no blame for what could or couldn't happen, because we are abusing substances on tonight's show. All over the counter, but we are abusing substances. They're watching us in French Camp, Mississippi. Bristol, England is tuned in, I'm told. Sandy Springs, Georgia. Lubbock, Texas. Thank you guys so much. We do college football year-round. Our subscription numbers have been great this week because it's free. All you have to do is click the button, and voila, you're there. And it helps us, and it doesn't hurt you or sign you up for anything. So there you go. Okay. It's a tough time for us all. Why not crack open a Zevia while we're at it? I got cream soda here, but I have discovered a couple of new flavors I'll probably truck into the office very soon. But zero sugar, friends. Zero sugar cream soda. Beautiful sight. It's a beautiful taste, if taste can be beautiful. Here's what's not beautiful. Colin, here's a good endpoint for you. It's not a question of whether the college football playoff is expanding again or whether they're going to rework it again. It's going to happen, guys. I don't like it. Apparently many of you now all of a sudden don't like it. Welcome. Welcome to the party that no one wanted to attend. But it's going to happen. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time whining and complaining about it. I did that in bed last night. I called my mom. I'll write to pen pals. Whoever will listen to me whine and complain, that's where I do my whining and complaining about playoff expansion. But seeing that it's going to happen, and seeing as how I would love to one day be the commissioner of this great sport of ours, I feel like I owe it to you to answer your questions about what I do. Which of these formats would work? And believe it or not, I have come down on a side pretty substantially that I think would be best here. But I want you to hear me loud and clear before I go down this road. Is everyone listening? I hate all of it. I hate this all. I wrote it in all caps on my notes just so I remembered. So I'm about to present some ideas to you. This is not my perfect world. This is like the realistic world. This is like student council circa 4th grade. No one was running that I liked. None of them were my friends. I just voted for the one I hated least. So I'm trying to settle on the format here that I hate the least. Now, a little backstory, 20-second version for those of you who have been living your lives or you just don't like this stuff. God bless you, by the way. You're more like me than you could ever know, even though I'm leading my show with this. The Big Ten and the SEC met in New Orleans this week. One of my favorite lines from any of the reports from these meetings was that both conferences made sure they had lawyers present to dispel any potential idea that they were colluding. Okay, well, there's that. I guess that's all you need, a couple of lines in a national story, and that's it. We're satisfied that you're not colluding. So, I mean, whomst amongst us would ever accuse the two of doing such a thing? So what's going to happen as soon as 2026, in all likelihood, is you're going to get a revamped playoff, it's going to go to 14 teams or 16 teams. That's not the question. A couple of you came in the comments after last show and said, oh, I don't think this is coming. It's not a question of that, guys. I wish it was. I wish we were going backwards, but it's not. So this is going to happen. It's not my opinion. It's just a matter of opinion of which way it's going to go. But we're going this direction. So few ideas have been floated out there, right? You could go to 14 teams. You could go to 16 teams. That's not the biggest point of contention. Really, the biggest point of contention is what the format is. There is one school of thought that if you go to 14 teams or 16 teams, whatever the number is, you just take the top 14 teams, seed them, and go about your business in the playoff. Sounds simple enough. In a previous life, that is the side that I would have landed on. But I've thought about it. And much like hope, thought can be a dangerous thing. And I've had a lot of idle time lately. And so when left to my own devices, I can come up with some sick stuff for college football. And I have. I've got some stuff written on this piece of paper that had you told me 5 years ago I would be presenting on a show, I would ask, which penitentiary are we broadcasting from? What has happened to me? Who have you become? I didn't do this to me. Okay, if anything, society made me this way. So, I mentioned the one model is just seed it and let's go. That happens to be the model most of you like. If unofficial, unscientific polling is any indication, most college football fans want to know how many teams are going to be in the playoff, and then after that, you don't really want much of a format. You just want 1 through 14, 1 through 16, no automatic qualifiers. Let's make sure the conference champions are in. Most of you support that, but don't just automatically give them and them alone a first-round bye. So let's just go 1 through 14, 1 through 16. That's what most of you want. I've decided that's not what I think is best. I'll take any of it. I'll have to take something, immunity, but I come down on the side that I think the automatic qualifier format is pretty substantially what will make for the best product for college football moving forward. So what that looks like, and this is a rough outline, but pretty much what it would look like is, let's say you got 14 teams. Each conference has a certain allotment of teams they know they're going to have in. SEC and Big Ten would have 4 apiece. You know, the ACC would have 2 apiece, or the Big 12 would have 2 apiece. The G5 would be guaranteed 1. Notre Dame, if they're in the top 14, they're guaranteed a spot. That sort of thing. So it sounds so stupid. I used to think this idea was terrible. Some of you still think it's terrible. Let me tell you why I've come around on it. So right now, if you go with just the top 14 and you seed it straight, the SEC is not going to expand to 9 conference games. You can call them cowardly, you can call them whatever you want to. I wouldn't. If I were them, I wouldn't expand to 9 conference games for reasons I'm about to get to. Also, if you just do the straight seeding and you don't give the SEC or the Big Ten the automatic qualifier spots, the out-of-conference schedules are never going to get beefed up to the degree that they will get beefed up if we have the auto bid format or if we have the automatic qualifier format. Now, for those of you who think that sounds confusing, here's all that's happening. The SEC and the Big Ten are looking around the landscape and they're saying, we are way deeper and way more powerful than any of the rest of you. We want to expand the playoff. We actually want to include you. I'm not defending these people, mind you. I'm telling you what they're thinking. We want to include you. We want to throw you your scraps, but we invented this playoff for us. And so we want the guaranteed seats at the table. And if you give us those guaranteed seats at the table, or if you just get out of the way before we steamroll you and we get our seats at the table, then what we'll do, this is the SEC and the Big Ten talking to you, like you're 10. The SEC and the Big Ten will enter into a separate regular season out-of-conference scheduling agreement. You know, where Georgia plays versus Michigan more often, and where Texas plays versus Penn State more often, Alabama, Ohio State, etc. That will only happen in the automatic qualifier format because the thinking there is if we know we've got our 4 guaranteed spots at the table, we're not worried about our teams losing games so much anymore. We're not worried about beefing up our strength of schedule because we're not worried that a committee will look at one of our teams and say, oh, you went 9-3. We can't give you a spot. We've got to give it to 11-1 Brigham Young or something like that. They're not worried about that so much anymore. But in the straight seeding format, they would be worried about that. Therefore, they're not going to beef up the scheduling, okay? So whether you like it or not is irrelevant to the fact that that's their thinking. And so to me, the only way to get the best of both of those worlds is to go with the automatic qualifier spots. Now, There's a lot of detractors out there that have significant pushback on this. And I know what your pushback is. I hear you right now. I hear you yelling at me right now. I'm going to answer it all because I will not come with a plan without follow-ups on it. So I've got an answer for you. But the automatic qualifier thing I love is because I love the concept of the automatic qualifier. I don't love any of it. Let me rephrase. I prefer the concept of the automatic qualifiers. I prefer the concept of the SEC knows they're getting 4, the Big Ten knows they're getting 4, Big 12, ACC, they know they're getting 2 apiece. I prefer that because at that point, you're not so much worried about a committee anymore. You're not even so much worried about the playoff during the season. Your sole focus is on the conference races. And selfishly, guys, that's what I care about. I don't care about the playoff. So selfishly, if we're going to have an expanded playoff, I want whatever version of it puts off the focus on the playoff for as long as possible. And the automatic qualifier format does. Because if I know the SEC is getting 4 in, well, then I'm just paying attention to the SEC's league standings all year or the Big Ten's league standings all year. And then I've told you what my idea of it would be. You get to the finish line, and if the Big Ten knows they get 4 teams in, to me, the smartest way to go about this is take number 1 and number 2 and just give them your first 2 seats. They don't even play in a conference title game anymore. What we do with that weekend is we reimagine it, and you play 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5 in your conference standings during that Saturday as your 2 play-in games. The winners of those games take your final 2 seats. Now, there's some other folks out there who say, well, if you're going to do it that way, why don't you just have a full-on 1 versus 8, 2 versus 6, 3 versus 5, 4 versus whatever. You get it. Well, it's because you're putting half the league in a quasi-playoff at that point, and you're well past the point of diminishing the return of the value of your conference schedule. So I'm not for that. So anyway, I'm for the automatic qualifiers, okay? If we're going this direction, I actually prefer the automatic qualifiers, but that's not the sick part. The sick part, the one where you really need to put the women and children to bed, the one where you're going to have to roll up your sleeves and just give me a second on this, is when I start listening to the detractors. Because anyone who's looking at a 14-team or a 16-team playoff, and they're saying, you know what, if we're going down that road, I think the SEC and the Big Ten needing 4 teams guaranteed apiece, I think it makes sense. I love that that maintains maximum focus on the league standings in a given year. The detractors listen to that, and they say things like, but what about how imbalanced the schedules are? And I hear you, and I've got an answer for that. And the detractors say, I kind of like the chaos and the objectivity of having, a committee deciding things. I may disagree with you, but I'm willing to entertain that. I've got an idea for that. And a detractor may also say, hey, if we go the automatic qualifier route, and we're just focused on the league standings, if that's really what's going to determine who gets your 4 spots, who cares about out-of-conference games? Yeah, you can tell me that Ole Miss is playing Michigan, but if they know that it's all going to come down to their league standings, well, who cares who wins that game? Isn't it a glorified exhibition game? It is if you go by league standings in a classical sense. This is where we're going to get really sadistic with this. It is my belief that in this reimagined world, where we've already thrown so much convention into the blender, you've already thrown so much tradition into the blender, who's to say anything maintains its classical definition? So if we're going into a world where the SEC has 4 guaranteed seats at the table, right, and they're playing a beefed up out-of-conference slate of games with the Big Ten, and there's 16 teams in the SEC, so Florida's schedule could be way harder than Missouri's schedule. Who's to say that the top 6 in the SEC is just the top 6 according to the conference standings? Who's to say I don't have my own subcommittee within conferences that determine that 1 through 6? Now, that's an insane concept, but it's really not. It's just never been done before. But then again, we've never had the sport look like this before. The leagues are too big, guys. It's what I'm trying to say. One thing I'm trying to say. The leagues are too big. The leagues right now are such that we could be both playing in the Big Ten and I play a schedule and you play a schedule, and you end up playing 5 top 20 teams and I play 1. Well, we're not playing 162 games. We're playing 8 or 9 conference games, and there is vast disparity in strength of schedule to the point where the top 6 may not really be the best 6. But what can I do if I'm solely going by league standings? Well, a conference rankings committee takes care of that. And I'll tell you what else they do. A conference rankings committee removes your ability to totally mail in an effort in an out-of-conference game because they are grading you on everything. That conference committee, that SEC or Big Ten conference committee is judging you just like the playoff committee would have. They're just judging you within the confines of your conference. So we get to the end of the year, and chances are your top 6 will be the same as it would have been, but there is room to maneuver. There's room to maneuver, number one, because inevitably, if you're playing 9 conference games or 8 conference games, you're going to have a ton of ties. So you'll need those settled. And I'd prefer not to go to number 6 or number 7 on the tiebreaker list down to a coin flip. I would love some informed judgment on that matter. Number 2, if you have such a disparity in strength of schedule to where one team is 1 game worse than the other, but it's blatantly obvious to everyone that, hey, the 9-3 team here, number 1, they played a much tougher league schedule than the 10-2 team. Number 2, they've got 6 quad 1 wins, and this dude has 2. And number 3, they won against Michigan and Iowa out of conference, and the 10-2 team played garbage out of conference. Well, then I want to be able to rectify that in the room. So what did we just do there? We maintained the value of out-of-conference games, because you better go try and win them, or you're going to get punished for them at the hands of your conference committee. Number 2, I made sure that there's a mechanism that accounts for the radical imbalance in conference scheduling because of how big the conferences are. And number 3, for those of you out there who actually love the subjectivity and you love the chaos and the debate from the committee every week, well, I just enhanced it tenfold because now you got it in every conference. Is it crazy? Of course it's crazy. All of this is crazy. I didn't want any of it, but I'm trying to come with answers instead of just complaining about the problems. Now, as for 2025, I know there have been some headlines this week about how the SEC, the Big Ten, they're trying to maneuver and jockey for the 2025 format to get fixed, which of course it needs to be. I still doubt it will be. For the record, they need different levels of approval for that. Like they need unanimity. I almost said anonymity. They need unanimity on that in order to overhaul the 2025 format. My guess is the format remains unchanged, although we'll see. But I will say, like, there is so much intentional, disingenuous nature about the conversation around this. And it's okay. Like Jim Phillips is the ACC league commissioner. He has to look out for the ACC. I know that. I'm not ignorant. I understand what his job is. None of these commissioners are tasked with looking out for the best interest of college football right now. You're tasked with looking out for your own best interest. I know that. But when he said the other day, I don't know if we're ready to just scrap the rule that says you have to be a conference champ to get a first-round bye. Because, you know, in the NFL, there's special provision for winning your division and your first-round placement. It's so intellectually bankrupt for a number of reasons, but the chief of which is college football compared to the NFL is apples to bowling balls right now. And I'm going to do a little exercise later in the show that illustrates that, but if you can't watch the Big Ten and then watch the Big 12, if you can't watch the SEC, then watch the ACC, and not understand that this is a little different than watching the NFC East and the NFC North, I don't know what to tell you. Jim Phillips knows that. If Jim Phillips were the commissioner of the SEC, he'd be making the exact opposite point. If Jim Phillips were in Greg Sankey's shoes and vice versa, Sankey would be the one yelling about fairness and inclusion and everyone should have a shot and we got to value conference champs. And Jim Phillips would be the one saying, "Fool, be happy we're even letting you in this door." So I get what everyone's job here is. I'll just say this. I'll be pleasantly surprised if they adjust the format for 2025. No, of course it's dumb for you to be required to win a conference championship to have a first-round bye. Of course it's dumb. But that's the way it was this last year. That's the way it will be at least one more year. I think that's the way it will be for one more year. And if I'm wrong there, I don't have guided information on this. It's just my feeling that the last remaining seconds of power and influence that entities like the ACC or the Mountain West have, they're going to use, they're going to exert, because that time is quickly coming to an end. Academy Sports and Outdoors, the time for you to stop by their store is coming to an end today, because it's already 7:20 on the East Coast, so they got to close sometime. But the good news is they'll just open tomorrow. And the even better news is, with spring sports season around the corner, you want to head out and go fishing next week, whatever the case may be, even if you want to do it at 11:20 tonight, just go to academy.com. You can order whatever there. I encourage you to go visit them in-store, but if you can't get there, that's okay. Academy.com has you covered. They're not so much talking about the playoff there. They're talking about whether they can help you gear up. They're talking about giving you some big league chew in the checkout line. They are a longtime partner of this show. They make sure we are able to present the show free of charge, and we appreciate them, and I'm sure that you will as well. All right, let's move along. So I mentioned a second ago, although this is a whole new part of the show, but scheduling in this sport is so broken. It's so broken, and it's their fault. It's the fault of anyone who advocated for expanding these conferences and realigning these conferences. College football was never meant for a conference to be coast to coast. College football was never meant to have conferences 16 or 18 teams deep, but yet here we are. And so scheduling is stupid right now. Even league scheduling is stupid right now. So do we at least agree on that? Like, do we all at least agree that it's pretty dumb to have 18 teams or 16 teams in a conference and have the vast disparity in strength of schedule, Team A to Team B? I mean, last year I looked at Florida and then I looked at Missouri. These schedules were from different planets, and yet allegedly they played in the same conference. So here's what I would love to do, and we've been working on this internally. I am really passionate, maybe the right word. I'm really aggressive about properly defining strength of schedule for our own purposes, purpi, the plural of purpose, in-house. I just want to know that for my own self. However, I also wish college football was a lot more dutiful about properly defining strength of schedule. So again, there's a problem, but what are we about around here? We want solutions. So in-house around here lately, we've been working on blending the proper criteria to properly define strength of schedule. And by that, I just mean I want to be able to pull up your 1 through 12, who are you playing this year, and I want to really know how tough your schedule is. And by tough, I don't mean let's just add up the combined record of your opponents at the end of the year, because if you are what your record says you are, then your schedule is a culmination of what your opponent's records say they are. That's just kindergarten 1984. We've come a long way since then. Then we got a little better understanding of the sport as it blends with data and mathematics and logic than we did back then. So what we do in-house every year, this year no exception, is I do like to go over in this time of year, because we haven't even gone through spring yet, I like to look at an odds board. Okay? I like to know, hey, what are the biggest sports books in the country saying about a team's odds to win the title this upcoming year? I go look at your roster talent, and I weigh that. I look at the quality of your coaching staff and your organization, and I weigh that. And we throw all of these things in a blender. Take all that criteria, just toss it in a blender, weight it properly, mix it properly. There's no one thing that's disproportionately weighted there. Although, I mean, I would argue roster grade is pretty heavily weighted. But what we do is we do all that, and then we spit it out. And I filter the teams into 8 different tiers. So that when I look at your schedule, I don't see that you're playing Akron, and then you're playing Charlotte, and then you're playing Clemson, and then you're playing Ohio State. I see that you're playing a Tier 8, and then a Tier 6, and then a Tier 2, and then a Tier 1. And that's how I like to define your schedule. And that's a living, breathing rating that changes throughout the year, and so on and so forth. So before we move on, I want to ask everyone, does that make sense to you? I just laid out the basic logic. You may have minor tweaks that you would make. You may have things that you care about a little bit more than I do. But broad strokes purposes, does that make sense? Does that inform you, in other words, about how difficult someone's schedule may be, more than just looking at the record of the teams on the schedule? If you answer no, then the rest of this segment is not for you. I would venture to think most of you understand to some degree this is college football. There's a little bit more to how good a team is than what their record indicates. And I'm not so much talking about grading the team. Like if I'm Pate State over here and I'm 9-3, well, let's say I'm 9-2, and you're playing me this weekend, I'm not so much talking about whether 9-2 should be the way I judge Pate State when it comes to a playoff or anything like that. I mean, for your purposes, you need to know, hey, are my 2 losses to the number 1 and number 2 team in the country? Or did I lose 2 games to average teams and then get fat on 9 wins against teams outside the top 100? Like, that matters very much so when it comes to defining your strength of schedule. So that's all we're trying to do here. So I'm looking in the live chat. A lot of people say, yes, this makes sense. The reason I wanted you to answer that, or if you're listening to the replay, listening to the podcast later, the reason I want you to answer that before I tell you what I'm about to tell you is because I want to know if the logic seems sound to you. Because this is the way you should approach this sort of thing. Does that reason, does that logic seem sound? Because there's no emotion involved in it. There's no favoritism. There's no bias. There's no anything like that, right? Do we agree with that? I think most of us agree with that. All right, so with that in mind, I need to inform you the SEC has 11 of the 12 toughest schedules this upcoming year. I'm just pausing for a second because we have thousands upon thousands of examples, at least, of people who are listening to the show or watching the show who just agreed that the logic makes sense, that are now calling it SEC homerism, and I didn't even change anything. In fact, I kind of had you agree on it before I presented the number. The number's the number. Number could change. The number will change because we haven't gone through spring. We haven't done our own inputs. So this is a very, very preliminary stat that I'm holding in my hand. But just a very, very broad February sort of look at this. And this is another reason scheduling is so broken in this sport right now. The SEC teams, we got 16 of them. SEC teams face 54 combined Tier 1 opponents this year. A lot of that's in conference play. The Big Ten faces 40. Okay, so SEC, 54 Tier 1 opponents. Big Ten, a little behind, but still way up there, 40 Tier 1 opponents. The ACC has a combined 18 Tier 1 opponents. The Big 12 has 1. And I think that was an out-of-conference game against like Oregon or something like that. 12 of the 16 teams in the SEC are either in Tier 1 or Tier 2. That is not to say that we would use this system to project that 12 SEC teams finish in like the top 15. Of course, that's impossible. We're talking about the difficulty you have in playing that team on any given Saturday when we're trying to define your strength of schedule. So the pushback on this, before anyone even bothers typing it, is a system like this is built to be self-fulfilling for the myth that is SEC and or Big Ten supremacy. And the thinking there is, well, of course, if you game the criteria on the front end, you can make the SEC or the Big Ten or any conference look as good as you want to on the back end. Which is, again, why I asked, does the logic make sense? Because, see, when we run our data sets, when we run our modeling, the computer doesn't even know what an SEC team is or a Big Ten team is. So the insinuation there for anyone who thinks that there's foul play involved here would be, well, yeah, the computer doesn't know what an SEC team is, but you know, because you programmed the thing, you know that the SEC teams are going to disproportionately recruit at a higher level. So if you tell the computer to disproportionately weight roster talent at a higher level, then lo and behold, it's going to say the SEC plays, by and large, a tougher conference schedule. Yes, it is. Where's the flaw in that logic? Can you think of something that makes an opponent tough that doesn't have to do with the talent on the field? Am I missing something there? So yes, this may say something you do or don't like. I got plenty about the sport I don't like. Hey, I wish the SEC didn't have 16 teams in the conference. I wish Texas and Oklahoma were still in the Big 12. I got a lot of things I wish, but it's not reality. I wish Oregon wasn't in the Big 10. I wish they were in the Pac-10, and I wish it was called 10 instead of 12. I got a lot of things I wish. I'm just calling balls and strikes here as it relates to strength of schedule. So the thing I took away from this is it's actually a really good time to be an elite team in the Big Ten. Because the Big Ten at the top's really good. I would argue last year it was better than the SEC. I think that's pretty obvious. I don't think many people disagree with that. But think about the difference in the Tier 2, Tier 3 depth. In the Big Ten, you got Ohio State and any given year Michigan, Oregon, Penn State's going to be there. What is Tier 2? It's really nothing. You just kind of skip down to what the equivalent of Tier 3 would be. In the SEC, we may not have even had the equivalent of a Tier 1, although we did. But there is so much Tier 2. 12 of the 16 teams in the SEC, by this logic, are either Tier 1 or Tier 2 teams. The Big Ten, by comparison, has 4 Tier 1 teams, but only 1 in Tier 2. So there's a cliff, and then it drops off. So if you're Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, whatever, in the Big Ten, and you qualify as elite for that given year, you want to play as many conference games as you can, because statistically, you're more than likely playing a bunch of Tier 3 or below teams, and you're getting fat, and you get to flex on people because you talk about how many conference games you're playing. And Notre Dame also is in a really good position here, because Notre Dame gets to decide their schedule. I got no problem with Notre Dame. I'm normally the one defending them when people hate on their schedule, but Notre Dame doesn't play a lot of games against any tier of the SEC. So they're playing a national schedule. They'll play a top ACC team in Miami. They'll play a good one from the SEC, a good Tier 2 team in Texas A&M this year. They'll play a Tier 3 or Tier 4 in the SEC on the road at Arkansas. But look at the totality of that schedule. It's a really manageable schedule. We'd have it in the 50s this year, I think, as of right now. So we aren't talking about the same sport, is what I'm getting at. The whole purpose behind this, the whole reason you have to talk about college football like this in a way you would never talk about pro sports, is because in the NFL, the first hardest schedule and the 32nd hardest schedule are relatively close together compared to college football, where you got Oklahoma this year. I want you to listen to this. Oklahoma this year will play 6 games against Tier 1 teams. They'll play 3 games against Tier 2 teams. Brigham Young will play 0 games against Tier 1 or Tier 2 teams. And I'm supposed to believe you are what your record says you are, and they're playing the same sport. In reality, I mean, Brigham Young's got 10 games versus teams Tier 4 or worse. In reality, I think most people would look at that, and if Oklahoma went 9-3, you would consider them better than a 10-2 Brigham Young. The committee would consider them better than a 10-2 Brigham Young. In a logic-based world where this is properly weighted, you would have a world where an 11-1 Brigham Young is not superior to an 8-4 Oklahoma, depending on how that played out. The disparity in these schedules is night and day. Night and day. That is 9 games Oklahoma plays that is tougher than Brigham Young's toughest game this year. We're not even talking about the same sport. So there exists a need to define strength of schedule much differently than you are what your record says you are. We'll work on it when I'm elected, if I'm elected. I think I probably alienated a lot of people there. Again, I want to remind you, I don't like the way it is right now. I don't like that 2 schedules have completely, or 2 conferences have completely swallowed up the sport. Don't like it. Advocated against it. Fought against it. Don't like a lot of this. But once we're there, I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist. I don't say Power 4 very often on the show. The reason is because it insinuates there are 4 equal conferences out there. There aren't. There aren't at all. There's a Grand Canyon between the top 2 and whoever number 3 is. The cutoff is not after number 4. The cutoff is after number 2, whether I like it or not, because I don't. But to ignore that is to just ignore reality, and it's almost like you're trying to traffic in this idealistic, like fairy tale college football world. It doesn't exist. This college football is like Shawshank right now. It's a very ugly, mean place. But what are we going to do? We got to come in and clean it up. That's what we got to do. Let's move on. I had a question about a noteworthy young man in the sport of college football. So let me just go ahead and get to this right quick. I promise we're going to handle this responsibly this year. Greg from Houston, Texas, he said, I'm getting really tired of seeing the Arch Manning hype. I'm tired of seeing Arch being put on all these social graphics as the best returning player or the best quarterback. He hasn't played a big game yet. It's just because his last name is Manning. Tell me I'm wrong. Well, Greg, which graphics are you talking about? I need that first. I need to know which social media graphic, which person, which company defined Arch Manning as the best returning player or the best returning quarterback. Show me that first, because I haven't seen it. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, Greg. I'm saying I haven't seen it. But then secondly, let's be very careful here. Now, I'm not just talking to Greg. I'm talking to everyone. Remember a generation ago, a guy by the name of Tim Tebow comes through Florida. And by the time he leaves Florida, I'm being told Tim Tebow is the most polarizing player in college football. And even at the time, I was still really young. Even at the time, I remember thinking, what's polarizing about Tim Tebow? So I had some buddies that hated Tebow, a bunch of Georgia fans mainly. So they don't just hate him because of that Gator logo or the fact that he beat them more times than not. They hated him when you really got down to it, and you had them be honest with you. They hated Tebow because he was overexposed. Everyone talked about him. He's on the cover of every magazine. He is the lead topic on SportsCenter and College Football Live and College Football Final. It's Tebow everywhere, Tebow Mania, as they called him. So their answer was, I'm going to hate Tim Tebow. Well, Tim Tebow didn't write a single article about himself. Tim Tebow didn't host a single segment about himself. So I always wondered then, just like I'll wonder about Arch Manning this year. Do you hate Arch Manning, or do you hate the overcoverage of Arch Manning? I would think it's the latter, disguised as the former. So what we'll do on this show is we'll talk about Arch Manning as the situation warrants, but I'll tell you ahead of time what my expectations are. Like he's number 2 over at FanDuel in the Heisman odds right now. That's high to me. I expect Arch Manning to play good enough for Texas to contend for a playoff spot. Anything above and beyond that, I'll be happy with. But I will not be disappointed if that guy doesn't light it up and rewrite the record books in year one. Now, the hype train is going to be such that if you buy into that, there's probably nothing he can do to match it. I mean, very rarely does a player, of that caliber end up meeting the hype. And if they do, that's great. But I don't expect him to be that. So I'm not going to be let down if he's just the 7th best quarterback in the country this year. That's where I stand on it. But I did want to get to that one other thing Greg said. Greg said Arch Manning wouldn't be this hyped if not for his name. Well, here's the thing, Greg. You're probably right about that. I doubt we'd hear as much about Arch Manning. Now, he's a 5-star quarterback, and he's at the University of Texas, so we'd still hear about him. But you're right. We probably wouldn't hear about him as much if his last name wasn't Manning. But the insinuation there is there's nothing to that last name. Well, how dumb would we have been in retrospect if we had watched Archie Manning play his career? And then he's got a kid named Peyton coming along, because this all happened. And Peyton has a high-profile recruitment, because this actually happened. And he commits to Tennessee. And folks run around saying, it's that last name that's drawing the hype. Well, what did Peyton Manning go on to do? Then he's got a brother named Eli. And so just rinse, wash, and repeat. It's the last name. Dude goes on to win 2 Super Bowls, but it's just the last name, man. People are getting so caught up in it. So now we're going another generation down the lineage. Arch Manning, yeah, he's got that last name. What else does he have because of the last name? Number one, he's got total immersion for his entire lifetime into what it means to play quarterback at the highest level the sport can possibly put you in. Number two, obviously the genetics checked out. If you've ever seen him in person, you've watched him play, you understand genetically he didn't get shortchanged. That's another thing that matters. DNA matters a lot when it comes to your last name. And there's a very early indicator here that in the way he handles himself, it's textbook. Arch Manning, in reality, if he's as good as we think he'll be, Texas would be willing to accept some baggage along with that. No one will ever say that. Sark would never say that publicly, but most head coaches know if you're guaranteeing me that I'm getting superstar caliber talent at quarterback, a little diva personality every now and then, a little tough to handle in practice every now and then, that's just par for the course. That's part of it. We'll accept it because the reward at the end of the day makes it worth it. He hasn't had any baggage that we know about. Arch Manning's been like a model citizen over there. You hadn't heard a peep out of him. So You've got all the pluses with what that last name entails. The dude should be a punk, just like a snot-nosed kid. He's been handed everything his entire life. He's none of that. So all of the downside, all of the risk, I don't see. I do see the reward. You are probably right, Greg. He gets a lot more coverage before he's done anything of note at the college level because of what his last name was. But I don't just flippantly say that. Oh, well, other than having the last name Manning, other than the shooting, Miss Lincoln, how was the play? No, that other than, the part before the other than, it's pretty significant. That last name at the quarterback position, the sport of football, probably going to have some significance that it carries. But we won't overhype him. You have my word on that. Let's roll merrily along here. They are watching us. Sorry, Colin, I had my Post-its screwed up. There we go. They're watching us in Los Angeles, California, Chillicothe, Ohio, which I always thought was Chillicothe. Probably mispronounced it both times. And Salt Lake City, Utah. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. To much dismay and anguish and gnashing of teeth in the comments, we have done the SEC and the Big Ten program rankings lately. So here's a good endpoint, Colin. It's time to rank the ACC programs, not teams, programs. What do we care about here? How do we define a program? Quick reminder. We define a program by how good you acquire talent, recruiting disproportionately, but also the portal. We care about your wins and losses. How have you done on the field? We care about your resource pool. You broke? You got some money in the pockets? How's the facility picture looking? And also we care about organizational stability. You having to fire folks? You got constant roster and coaching churn? And we care about these things over a rolling 4-year period. So at any given point, to define a program, I want a 4-year snapshot of those things. And with that in mind, I think it's pretty obvious Clemson is still the #1 program in the ACC. You can say they're trending down. That's all relative, though. Clemson had a long way to trend down before they relinquished the top spot of ACC programs. They have won 6 of the last 8 ACC championships, including 2 of the past 3. No one touches them. No one's touching them. In that part, they're the #2 recruiting program, #2 talent acquisition program. In the conference right now, the foundation, been rock solid. Organizationally, they've been rock solid. Zero doubt. You can question methodology or strategy here and there. Dabo's got the best program. Clemson's got the best program in the ACC. And it's the only program there that has a championship pedigree. It's the only one, even to this day, where I can look at them and say, I could see Clemson winning a national championship. I can't say that about Miami yet under Mario. I can't say that about Mike Norvell and Florida State. I have no clue what they're going to be, and I can't say that about anyone else in the conference. Like Louisville at their best, it's probably not a national championship contender. No one else in the ACC is. So Clemson, by a pretty wide margin right now, I think is the #1 program in the ACC. Now, here's where it gets not fun per se. I don't want to go as far as to say we're about to have fun, but this gets debatable. So I think Miami's the #2 program in the ACC now. They're the #1 talent acquisition program. When you factor in recruiting and portal, no one's acquiring talent better than them. So then the follow-up is, yeah, but they're not winning with it. Well, they are. They are. Maybe not as much as you or I predicted them to this past year, but somehow Mario's turned 10 wins into a disappointment at Miami. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. So they've improved their record year over year, 3 years that he's been there. Their recruiting and their talent acquisition has soared up to the #1 spot in the conference. You can tell me they're not elite, and I would agree with you, they're not. Who are we putting above them? Factoring in the criteria we're factoring in here, who are we putting above them? I can't put Florida State above them right now. I have no clue what Florida State is. Last year was devastating, which brings me to my next point. Florida State is still #3 because this is the reason we do this. The reason we do program rankings instead of just team rankings, because we do both of them. But the reason we add program rankings in is because Florida State, even though they just had a disastrous 2024, I got Florida State as the #3 program still in the ACC. I just can't believe 2024 happened. If you defined what you thought the worst case would be for Florida State last year, they were several losses worse than worst case. But as bad as it was, that's 1 year. So we're factoring in a rolling 4-year blend here. It's the difference between a team and a program. Theoretically, last year was just a team. Now, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't really nervous about what that meant for the program, but it doesn't just get turned off overnight. They've got a 13-win season and a 10-win season baked into the last 4 years. I'm not overlooking that. I'm not forgetting that just because last year was a disaster. The outcomes of their approach make them prone to volatility. So until they get their recruiting structure in such a shape where they're disproportionately leaning on that instead of the portal, they're going to be prone to up and down and up and down. I don't like it. I don't love it. But that also means they could immediately bounce back this year. Could. Nevertheless, I got Florida State at number 3. Louisville's at number 4. I considered putting them at number 3. Louisville, I have thought for a while, is the most underrated program in college football. I think they're led by the most underrated head coach in college football. Their last 4 years, 6 wins, 8 wins, 10 wins, 9 wins. Jeff Brom, I don't think most people would quickly rank as a top 10 head coach. I think Louisville's got a top 10 head coach in college football. So they're in a blessed position there. They are probably also the best portal-reliant program out there right now. They do, to a large degree, what Florida State's been doing. They just do it more consistently. There's less volatility with Louisville's approach. Florida State goes and rides the portal to a 13-win season, and then they ride the portal straight into Hades the next year. Louisville's just, they hadn't won the conference, but Louisville also hadn't dipped below 8 wins the past 3 years. So they are solidly in there as a top 4. If you wanted to argue with me that they should be the number 3 program, I wouldn't push back. But Florida State's highs have been higher than Louisville's. That's why Florida State got the edge. This number 5 spot's tough too. SMU has been in the ACC for about 30 minutes. I got SMU as the 5th best program in this conference. Now, they had good records coming in, but you thought, is that going to translate to Power League football? Yeah, it did. They played for the conference title last year. Schedule was very workable. I can't do anything about that. I can just judge them based on what's there. They also, as a program, I love sort of the won't be denied attitude they have. I can't quantify that. It's pretty anecdotal. I'm looking for supporting evidence to back up my ranking of them. I admit that. The recruiting lately has ramped up. You can see in the trajectory of a lot of their criticals, you can see an acknowledgement that we're in the ACC now. We're going to have to ramp it up. And they have. They've leveled up in several areas. And I already think they were pretty good when they got here. So I got SMU 5. All right, 6 through 10. I'll cut it off at 10. I could go any order here. 5 through 8, really, I could go any order. 6 through 8 especially, I could go any order. I put Duke at number 6. They got 3 straight 8-win seasons. They've been a good team, really good program. They've got head coaching turnover, so they lost Mike Elko. They brought in Manny Diaz. They just made an ultra-aggressive move in the portal to get that quarterback from Tulane. So I got them at 6. I got NC State at 7. Very small gap here. Splitting hairs to argue this. Losing season last year dinged them, only because when things are that neck and neck, the result of one season can raise you or drop you a few degrees more than normal. Georgia Tech, I've got at 8. Program is in total ascension mode. Their recruiting classes last 3 cycles, 62nd up to 33rd, up to 21st. On field, they've had a big jump. And, you know, I think they'd be garnering a lot more headlines had they won that 42 overtime game against Georgia. They didn't, so they're still in the weeds a little bit. I would suspect Georgia Tech will be higher than 8 when we do this next spring. I got North Carolina 9. I got Syracuse 10. Again, you're kind of splitting hairs when you get down there. So there you go, our top 10 in the ACC. And for the record, the odds to win the 2025 ACC championship, Georgia Tech's got better odds than Florida State now. So forget about what the programs are ranked. That's what the teams are in line to do, at least in the odds board right now. Let's continue to move merrily along. Appreciate you guys being tuned in live. Here's one of my periodic smiley faces for the live chat. Hey, USA-Canada tonight. We moved the show up an hour so we can get ready for the hockey tonight. Whew, hockey on fire right now. Oklahoma, not so much. Harry hit me, called me Pater, so that's the first no-no on the show. Secondly, he said, give me a realistic expectation for Sooner football this year. Well, Brent Venables, first 3 seasons there, 6-7, 10-3, back to 6-7. Not great. So they flushed the offense, which was 97th in points per game, and it was 113th in yards per game, and they were the worst team in FBS in sacks. And they said, all right, we gotta do something. And so they did. And they went and got a quarterback out of the portal. They got an offensive coordinator out of the portal, well, the coaching portal at least. So the schedule's brutal. So my expectation is not a ton of, like, huge improvement. But I hope they at least make a bowl. They got to retool that offensive line. They got to replenish the running back room. That's above and beyond the other stuff that's obvious. I just need noticeable improvement September to December. If I just look at the team and I see that, wow, they look better now than they did 3 weeks ago, at least that's progress. I'd hope we could have more in year 4, but at least that's progress. Ironically, we were looking at B-roll of them play Auburn last year. I kind of feel the same way about Auburn this year. So, given their schedule, which could be the toughest in the league, 7-5 would do it for me. But I don't think it would do it for Oklahoma fans. But you asked me what my expectation would be. I'm just not assuming this overnight rebound. And especially when you factor in that schedule, remember what Florida did last year? Florida ended up gutting out a 7-win season. If Oklahoma can do that, it's not the worst thing in the world. John Mateer at quarterback, Arbuckle at offensive coordinator, like, we don't know. We do not know. We thought Seth Luttrell would be okay there. Well, he wasn't. So we don't know. We got to find out if it blends right. Now, if the best case happens, this is a 9-win team, which puts you on college football playoff fringes. But I'm not predicting that. They're over under 6.5 wins. So if you can hit that over, you go 7 wins for me with that schedule, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. I feel like in a weird way we're back on track if we can get there. If we can get there. If you want to get anywhere, Quick Trip, probably the answer. I mean, if what you're riding in carries fuel, or if you yourself carry caffeine, they carry both of them in plentiful supply at Quick Trip. We appreciate them. The official energy supplier of the show, of Pate State. We run on what Quick Trip provides, and we appreciate them. All right, got a couple of more things to get to here. Very interesting question about the Sunshine State. Jeff, out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, he said, did you see Bud Elliott's backwards take on the Big 12? Never, oh, you know what I said, Colin? I said the Sunshine State. All right, keep this up, immunity. I just have to pull the old switcheroo on myself. All right, here we go. Pretend like you didn't hear any of that if you're watching live. So Jeff from Albuquerque, New Mexico hit me. He said, did you see Bud Elliott's backwards take on the Big 12 never winning a national title in our lifetime? As someone who has called it America's Conference, I need Big 12 Pate to tell me how asinine this is. Confirmation bias is what Jeff has come to the table looking for. You are right, Jeff, that I am Big 12 Pate. It's my favorite conference to watch. I have called it America's College Football Conference. So, Jeff is talking about this backwards tweet from one Budrick Elliott. What did Budrick say? Here's what he said. If you're listening on podcast, I'm showing it on the screen right now. He said, in terms of having a legit title contender, the Big 12 is closer to the G5 than it is to the other 3 Power 4 leagues. I love the Big 12 for its entertainment value and competitiveness, but barring massive structural changes to college football, we'll all be dead before a Big 12 team wins the playoff. He's right. It's a shame. It's a crime and a shame, as Meemaw would say. But he's right. I don't know what you want me to tell you about that. Do you agree, Jeff, or anyone else, do you agree largely that talent wins championships? Not the most talented team, but by and large, is talent going to rule the day at the end of the day? Yes, it is. What would you do if I told you the Big 12 does not have a single program that has recruited in the top 20 on average the past 4 years? And then what would you do if I told you the Big 12 doesn't have a program that's recruited in the top 30 on average the past 4 years? Because both of those things are true. Now, history's telling us that to win a national title, you got to be a top 10 recruiter. I mean, there's 1 or 2 outliers, like Michigan, barely on the outside of the top 10 on average recruiting the past 4 years when they won their title. But outside of those one or two outliers, and they're fringe outliers, history this millennium has told us you got to be a top 10 recruiting program to win a national title. I don't have a single top 30 in the Big 12. The Big 12 is not winning a national championship. Therefore, might I suggest that we retrain our focus in the Big 12. I watch the Big 12 because I love the competitive balance in the league. I love that it's largely true to what a conference is supposed to be. And number three, I love the randomness. Like, everyone's pretty well evenly resourced. If I'm in the Big 12 or if I'm watching the Big 12, my goal for a team is win their conference, win the Big 12 conference. If I'm Kansas or if I'm TCU, that's what I'm focusing on. I want to get to Dallas on the first Saturday in December and win that league title, because that's a realistic goal. Because there's no one that's going to dwarf me in terms of resources. There's no one that's going to dwarf me in terms of talent roster. There's no coaching staff or salary pool that is infinitely bigger than mine will ever be. I'm competing against equally resourced programs. And that is fair, and that is a justifiable way of looking at the sport. However, if I'm at Baylor, and instead of worrying about winning the Big 12, I'm judging success by whether or not I can win a national title, I'll be a failure forever. I'm not telling you don't dream big or whatnot, but let's dream realistically as well. They're telling you out there, for the sake of shoving a playoff down your throat, that there are 120-something teams playing the same sport. They're not. We don't even have 40 teams playing the same sport. We're supposed to pretend we do. We're supposed to throw around the moniker Power Four like it means something. Like, you're kidding yourself right now. If you think there's a realistic shot for one of these teams to make the playoff. But Josh, I just watched Arizona State win the Big 12. I did too. I was there on the field when they did it. Great story. Love everyone in that program. Love them to death. Did a show from Arizona State last year, late in the season. Had Kenny on the show. Love everything about him. Hung out with Marcus Arroyo in Arkansas last week. Love everything about those dudes. Joe Conley, probably one of my favorite strength and conditioning guys in America. Don't tell me about Arizona State. I love Arizona State. I love the Big 12. Arizona State, Josh, they took Texas to overtime. How can you say they couldn't win a title? Well, the reason is because of what they would have had to do after they beat Texas. And what they would have had to do is beat two more top 10 talent programs, probably top 5 talent programs by the time you get to the finish line. And I don't think it's going to happen. But what's realistic is for Arizona State to do what they did last year. Get picked dead last and go win the league. Because the gap between one and whatever the last place team in that league is not that wide. It's an extremely fun conference to watch. I just wish, whether you're a G5 fan or a Big 12 fan, I wish people would refocus and recalibrate their expectation on something other than the playoff. I wish that. Selfishly, I wish that. Because it would be a lot better life. Having said that, if you'd like to go bet on a Big 12's odds to win the national title, you can do it. FanDuel readily makes it available to you. Now, if you want to go bet some Big 12 hoops, then I'm all for that. Responsibly, I'm all for that. You guys go do that all you want to. FanDuel, the exclusive odds provider of the show, the exclusive odds provider of Pate State. And we appreciate them. There's all kind of stuff already for the upcoming season. I mean, you can go bet basketball if you want to, but if you don't love it that much, go live bet the hockey game tonight. If you don't love that, I don't know, go bet Texas A&M to win the SEC at plus whatever 100 odds. You do whatever you want to do. But they are the exclusive odds provider of the show, so we encourage you to do it over there. All right, last question about the Florida coaches, then I'll get out of here. Jack hit us up and said, what coach in Florida is facing the most pressure next year? They're all facing different kinds of pressure. I don't even know how to answer this in February, but I will tell you, if I had to just say, okay, let's rank the pressure on the coaches, Norvell's got the most pressure on him, followed by Napier, followed by Mario. If I'm looking at Napier, there's so much tangible about how they ended the season last year. Like, you're thinking about Florida State, you're trying to grab air when you're trying to tell me what are they right now. Florida, there is a lot of tangible evidence that they are progressing rapidly. They're ascending as a program, we hope. DJ Lagway is one of the main reasons. Everybody stayed bought in there. Napier was as good as gone midway through last year, and then they just kept showing up to work, and now they're the better for it. They still need a similar result record-wise this year. Their schedule's brutal again. So I think that 7 or 8 win range or better, but minimum baseline, that 7 or 8 win range, they're fine. He's fine. I think Napier's fine. Mario's fine too. Like there's two different kinds of pressure in college football. We talk about it all the time. There's job security pressure, like you better win right now or you're fired. And then there's competitive pressure. Mario has no job security pressure. They just won 10 games in the regular season. He's got competitive pressure, which everyone should have all the time. You shouldn't need your boss breathing down your neck. You shouldn't need the message boards calling you out to have competitive pressure. The competitive pressure for them is Miami used to mean something, and now it doesn't anymore, or recently it hasn't, and I want it to mean that thing again. Which means if I've got a Heisman caliber quarterback and we lead the country in scoring, we better be better than just 10-2. You know, we'd better be a higher caliber outfit than blowing a lead to Syracuse and losing on the road at Georgia Tech, games that we're favored in, games we're supposed to win. But that's competitive pressure. There's no job security pressure on him. By the way, I know we can just gloss over 10 wins. Guys, outside of 2017, Miami had a 10-win season only one other time since they joined the ACC prior to last year. And they joined the ACC in 2004. So he's got them at a better level than they've been in a long time. And you could argue that, there's reason for optimism that they'll continue to improve. No guarantees in life, but I've got reason for optimism that they'll continue to improve. So that's competitive pressure down there. Now, at Florida State, I've got no clue. At Florida State, logic says, how could you have job security pressure at Florida State when you just won the conference a year ago? When you just got a contract extension a year ago? And it's one season. It was just one down season. All that makes sense to me. But are we trying to apply logic to an illogical world? Because if they went 6-6, that'd be one thing. They went 2-10. Like I said earlier in the show, find me the biggest FSU hater in the world. Go back to August and have that person's worst case record scenario for Florida State. It was not 2-10. So they did worse than the worst case that the haters of Florida State would have laid out for them. So was it one season? Yes. Do I still think Mike Norvell's a heck of a coach? Yes, I do. Did they make a ton of moves to overhaul things and change things? They changed both coordinator positions. He took a salary reduction. Yes. To all of these things, yes. But when you're that bad, when it falls off the cliff that violently, I'm uneasy because I don't know what you are. I have no idea what you are, so neither does the fan base. So it may be that they hop right back up and they win 9 games this year and all's well that ends well. But what if they lose to Bama by 17 in week 1 at home? Just like, what if that happens? Well, we're right back in the same vibe that we were to end the year. So, yeah, there's pressure to varying degrees down there in the state of Florida. Okay, look, it's hockey night, guys. I strongly encourage you to do your duty tonight and make sure Canada falls by 6 or 7 goals, because that's what we're about to go do. So I appreciate you guys so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We'll be back here, same time as usual, Sunday night. Until then, for Director Colin, Producer Jesse, I'm Josh Pate. Take care. Have a great start to your weekend, and God bless.